My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 28 years old, and I am the founder and CEO of Phoenix Enterprises, a name that fills boardrooms with a mixture of fear and respect. My company is a monolith of glass and steel that scrapes the Chicago sky, a testament to what can be built from nothing. But it wasn't built from nothing. It was built from ashes. It was forged in the fire of a betrayal so profound it hollowed me out and remade me into something stronger, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Began 10 years ago on my 18th birthday. The memory is not a soft, blurry thing of the past. It is a shard of glass lodged in my soul, forever sharp, forever drawing blood. It lives not in my mind but in my bones, a permanent chill that no cashmere coat or heated limousine can ever truly warm. I remember the silence. It was the first thing that struck me when I walked into the living room of our sprawling suburban home. Usually, the house hummed with life, the low murmur of the television, the distant clang of pots from the kitchen, the sound of my father, Robert Vance, on the phone. His voice a confident baritone that commanded the world of finance. But that day, a heavy, suffocating silence pressed in from all sides. My father stood by the grand marble fireplace, his back to me. Even from behind, I could see the tension coiled in his broad shoulders. He was a titan, a man who had built his logistics empire, Vance Industries, from a single truck into a fleet that crisscrossed the nation. He was my hero, the man who had taught me how to read financial reports before I could properly ride a bike. Across the room, perched on the edge of a silk-upholstered armchair, was my stepmother, Brenda. She was a woman sculpted from ice and ambition. Her blonde hair coiffed into a perfect, unmoving helmet. She had married my father 2 years after my mother's death, slipping into our lives with the silent, insidious grace of a predator. She was sipping tea, her little finger extended, and when she saw me, her lips curved into a smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Eleanor," my father said, his voice gravelly, unrecognizable. He turned and my breath hitched in my throat. The warmth and love I had known my entire life were gone from his eyes. In their place was a chilling cocktail of fury, disappointment, and a strange, almost fearful conviction. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice small. I was clutching a small, wrapped gift in my hands, a first edition of The Wealth of Nations I had saved up for months to buy for him. My birthday, his gift. It was our tradition. "Put that down," he commanded. The words were like a slap. I flinched, placing the book on a side table as if it were contaminated. Brenda set her teacup down with a delicate clink. "Robert, dear, maybe we should be gentle." Her voice was a syrupy sweet poison. "Gentle?" My father scoffed, his gaze fixed on me. "There's no time for gentle. Not after what we've discovered." My heart began to pound a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. "Discovered? What are you talking about?" For the next 10 minutes they laid it all out. It wasn't a conversation. It was a prosecution, and the verdict had been decided long before I had entered the room. Brenda, with feigned reluctance and crocodile tears, recounted a meticulously crafted narrative of misfortune that had begun, coincidentally, around the time I started to come into my womanhood, as she so delicately put it. The lucrative contract with Sterling Corp that had inexplicably fallen through. She'd had a terrible premonition about it the morning I had a small argument with my father over breakfast. The persistent flu that had swept through the Vance Industries main office. It started the week I'd been sick with a minor cold. The stock market dip that had cost them a fortune. She remembered I'd been morose and sullen that entire day, spreading my negative energy. It was insane. It was a tapestry of lies woven from coincidence and superstition. But my father, a man of logic and reason, a man who dealt in facts and figures, was buying every word. Brenda had spent years planting these seeds of doubt, watering them with whispers in the dead of night, nurturing them with sighs of concern and pointed glances. She had preyed on his grief for my mother, his fears for his business, and his latent anxieties, twisting them into a weapon aimed directly at me. "She's a curse, Robert," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "I've felt it for so long. Bad omen. Everything she touches. It sours. It's not her fault, of course. She can't help what she is. That was her masterstroke. By pretending to absolve me of blame, she made the accusation seem like an unavoidable, tragic fact of nature. I wasn't evil. I was simply a vessel of misfortune. I looked at my father, my eyes pleading with him to see the absurdity, the cruelty of it all. Dad, you can't believe this. This is Brenda. She's making it all up. His face hardened into a mask of stone. Brenda has been nothing but a loyal wife to me and a patient mother to you. She's opened my eyes. I've been blind, Eleanor. Blinded by sentiment. Every major downturn, every illness, every failure. You've been the common denominator. That's not true. I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. Business is unpredictable. People get sick. It has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it? He shot back, his voice rising to a roar. The day your mother was diagnosed, you failed your history exam. The day she died, you fell and broke your arm. It follows you. A cloud of bad luck, of darkness. He was twisting my own pain, my own childhood grief, and using it as evidence against me. The broken arm had happened because I'd been so distraught I'd fallen out of a tree. The failed exam was because I had been up all night at the hospital. He knew that. But in Brenda's narrative, these were not the actions of a grieving child. They were signs of the curse I carried. I'm done, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low growl. I am done watching my life, my business, the memory of your mother, be poisoned by your presence. He walked over to me, his shadow falling over me like a shroud. I shrank back. This man, my father, was a stranger. His eyes were the eyes of a zealot, a man convinced he was cutting out a cancer to save the body. You will leave this house. Now. The words didn't register at first. They were too monstrous, too final. What? No. You don't mean that. It's my birthday. Your birthday, he sneered, the word tasting like venom in his mouth. The day you brought your curse into my world. You will take nothing. Not your clothes, not your money. Nothing. You are no longer my daughter. You are no longer a Vance. You are the family's shame, and I am cutting you out. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and dragged me towards the front door. I struggled, tears streaming down my face, begging him, pleading with him to listen, to remember the little girl he had piggybacked through the park, the teenager he had helped with her calculus homework. But he was deaf to it all. He threw the door open, and the cold November air rushed in, biting at my skin. He shoved me out onto the porch. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. I had on a simple sweater and jeans, my purse with my wallet and phone still sitting on my bed upstairs. Had nothing. Don't ever come back, he snarled. Don't ever try to contact me. You are dead to me. I looked past him into the house, and saw Brenda standing in the foyer. She was no longer smiling. Her face was a mask of serene, victorious calm. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood everything. It was never about a curse. It was about her. She wanted me gone. She wanted my father's fortune, his name, his legacy, all to herself and the future children she planned to give him. I was the last remnant of his previous life, a ghost of the woman he had truly loved. And she had finally, brilliantly exorcised me. Then my father slammed the door. The heavy oak shuddered, the sound echoing through the quiet, tree-lined street like a gunshot. The lock clicked into place, a sound of absolute finality. And just like that, my life was over. I stood on the porch of the only home I had ever known, an 18-year-old girl disowned, disavowed, and branded a curse, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fire of rage and betrayal starting to smolder in the hollow cavity where my heart used to be. The world was vast and cold, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The first night was the coldest. Not just because of the biting November wind that sliced through my thin sweater, but because of the cold that had settled deep within my soul. The shock had numbed me for the first hour. I had simply walked aimlessly down the manicured streets of our wealthy suburb, the perfect houses with their warm, glowing windows mocking me. Each one was a portrait of a life I no longer had. When the numbness wore off, the pain hit me like a physical blow, so intense it buckled my knees. I ducked into an alleyway between two pristine mansions, slid down a brick wall and sobbed. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, the sound of a heart being ripped apart. My father's face twisted in rage, his words, "You are a curse. You are dead to me," played on a torturous loop in my mind. Hunger came next, a sharp, gnawing ache in my stomach that I had never truly experienced before. I had skipped lunch, too excited about my birthday dinner. Now the thought of food was an impossible luxury. I walked for hours until the sprawling lawns gave way to the harsher, grittier landscape of the city. The glowing signs of diners and fast food restaurants were beacons of a world I couldn't access. Had no money. Not a single cent. That night, I slept in a bus station, huddled on a hard plastic bench, trying to make myself as small as possible. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. Every time someone walked by, I flinched, convinced they could see the brand of shame on my forehead. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I drifted in a miserable twilight state, haunted by the image of Brenda's triumphant face. The next few weeks blurred into a monotonous cycle of misery. I learned the cruel calculus of survival. I discovered which shelters were the safest and which were territories of predators. I learned to panhandle, the shame burning my cheeks as I held out a hand, mumbling a request for spare change. The rejections were like tiny cuts, each one deepening the wound of my father's ultimate rejection. People looked through me, past me, as if I were invisible. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, daughter of a CEO. I was nothing. A ghost haunting the city streets. I found a job washing dishes at a greasy 24-hour diner called The Pit. The pay was cash, under the table a few dollars an hour. The owner, a grizzled man named Sal, didn't ask for an address or ID. He just looked at my desperate eyes and the raw red skin on my hands and pointed me to a mountain of dirty dishes. The work was grueling. My hands were perpetually submerged in greasy water. My back ached, and the smell of old coffee and fried bacon clung to me like a second skin. But it was a lifeline. It meant a few dollars for a slice of pizza or a hot coffee. It meant I wasn't starving. It was in the pit that my burning determination was truly forged. During my breaks, I would sit in a corner booth, nursing a cup of watery coffee, and watch the customers. I saw businessmen in cheap suits talking about deals, students hunched over textbooks, tired waitresses counting their tips. It was a microcosm of the world that had cast me out. And as I watched, the grief that had consumed me began to slowly, painstakingly, transmute into something else. It crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of rage. They had thrown me away. They had called me a curse and left me to die. They thought I would break, that I would simply disappear. I wouldn't. I would not just survive. I would conquer. I would build an empire so vast and powerful that my father's little logistics company would look like a child's toy train set in comparison. I would amass so much wealth and influence that the name Eleanor Vance would no longer be a whisper of shame, but a roar of power. I would not do it for them. I would do it for me. I would do it to prove that the only curse on the Vance family was their own greed, their own weakness, their own betrayal. Huddled in that greasy diner booth, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 shattered dreams, I made a vow. I would climb out of this pit, one bloody, broken fingernail at a time. And one day I would return. Not as a prodigal daughter seeking forgiveness, but as a queen coming to claim her throne. And I would burn their world to the ground. The diner was my first battleground. Survival was the initial objective, but my mind, starved for stimulation, began to see patterns, inefficiencies. Sal ran the pit on instinct and inertia. He ordered supplies when he noticed something was low, leading to frequent shortages of popular items and an excess of others that would spoil. It was chaotic, wasteful. One night, after my shift, fueled by stale coffee and a burgeoning sense of purpose, I stayed behind. Using the back of a guest check, I started sketching out a simple inventory system. I tracked what was sold over a 24-hour period, what was thrown out, what sat on the shelves. I cross-referenced it with supplier costs and delivery schedules. By dawn, I had a one-page plan that could save Sal hundreds of dollars a week. I presented it to him with my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected him to laugh, to tell the dishwasher to get back to the sink. He stared at the grease-stained paper for a long time, his brow furrowed. He looked at me, his gaze sharp, and for the first time, he saw something more than a desperate street kid. He saw a mind at work. "All right, smartass," he grunted. "You're off dishes. You handle the inventory and ordering from now on. Don't screw it up." He gave me a $50 a week raise. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. But more importantly, it was the first rung on the ladder. I had turned knowledge into value. It was a lesson I would never forget. I worked for Sal for a year, saving every single dollar I could. I lived in a tiny windowless room in a boarding house. My only possessions a few changes of clothes from a thrift store and a growing stack of books from the public library. The library was my sanctuary, my university. I devoured everything I could find on business, economics, supply chain management, and corporate law. I was no longer just surviving. I was studying, planning, preparing for war. My first venture was laughably small. Using my meager savings, I started a targeted cleaning service. I didn't have the capital for residential cleaning, so I focused on a niche market. Small, independent businesses like the pit that couldn't afford large commercial services but needed more than a simple janitor. I created professional-looking flyers at the library and walked the streets, pitching my services with a confidence I didn't feel. My first client was a laundromat owner who was impressed by my detailed proposal, which didn't just promise cleaning but also a system for maintaining the machines to reduce downtime. I did the work myself, scrubbing floors and cleaning lint traps from midnight until dawn, then going to my job with Sal. It was brutal, soul-crushing work. But with every new client, I felt a flicker of power. I was building something. It was mine. Setbacks were constant. A client who refused to pay for a month's work, claiming dissatisfaction. A larger competitor who tried to intimidate me, threatening to put my little charity project out of business. Each challenge was a lesson in the ruthlessness of the world. I learned to draw up ironclad contracts. I learned to negotiate with the tenacity of a bulldog. I learned that in business, you couldn't afford to be naive or sentimental. You had to be smarter, faster, and more relentless than everyone else. Within 2 years, Eleanor's meticulous maintenance had a dozen employees, all people like me. Cast-offs people society had overlooked, but who were hungry and willing to work. I paid them well and treated them with the respect I had been denied. Loyalty, I discovered, was a powerful asset. The real turning point came when I landed a contract to manage the logistics for a small regional chain of grocery stores. It was a long shot. I was competing against established companies, including a subsidiary of Vance Industries. They saw me as a joke, but I didn't give them a standard proposal. I spent a week living on coffee and adrenaline, analyzing their supply chain, identifying bottlenecks, and building a custom software model that demonstrated how my system could increase their efficiency by 15% and cut spoilage by half. I walked into that boardroom, a 22-year-old in an ill-fitting suit I'd bought at a consignment shop, and I blew them away. They gave me the contract. I heard through the grapevine that the team from my father's company was humiliated. The news must have reached him. For a moment, I allowed myself a sliver of dark satisfaction. It was the first arrow I had fired in his direction. That contract was the foundation of my empire. I officially incorporated as Phoenix Enterprises. The name was a promise to myself. I had risen from the ashes, and I would continue to rise. I used the profits to expand, to innovate, to poach the best talent from my competitors. I was relentless, working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. My life was my work. There was no room for anything else. No friends, no relationships. Love and trust were vulnerabilities I could not afford. Betrayal had taught me that lesson well. Over the next 6 years, Phoenix Enterprises grew at an explosive rate. We moved from logistics management into tech, developing proprietary software that revolutionized the industry. We expanded into freight, warehousing, and eventually international shipping. I was no longer the girl in the thrift store suit. I was Eleanor Vance, the enigmatic CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. My face was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. I was interviewed on financial news networks, my voice calm and confident, my analysis sharp and insightful. Through it all, I kept a close watch on Vance Industries. It was my secret obsession. I had a private team of analysts who did nothing but track my father's company. And what I saw was a slow, steady decay. After I was cast out, Brenda had finally gotten her wish. She and my father had a son, Robert Jr., the new heir. Her spending became legendary. Lavish parties, European vacations, a fleet of luxury cars. My father, blinded by his new wife and son, made a series of poor investments and reckless acquisitions, trying to recapture the aggressive growth of his early years. But the fire was gone from his belly. The company became bloated, inefficient, and complacent. The real curse, it turned out, was Brenda's greed and my father's weakness. And I watched it all, patiently, biding my time, moving my pieces across the chessboard. I bought up their debt through shell corporations. I acquired key suppliers they depended on. I lured away their top talent with offers they couldn't refuse. I was strangling them, slowly, methodically, and they never even saw my hand on their throat. Now, 10 years after that fateful day, the endgame was here. Vance Industries was on the verge of total collapse, bleeding money, crushed by debt. They were desperately seeking a buyout, a white knight to save them from bankruptcy. Their savior was an anonymous investment firm based out of Switzerland. A firm that had spent the last year acquiring a controlling interest in their company. A firm that I owned. Tomorrow, the board of Vance Industries would hold an emergency meeting to formally accept the buyout and meet the new owner. They thought they were being rescued. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. I stood in my penthouse office, looking out at the glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline. The city was a web of light and power, and I was at its center. The broken, starving girl from the bus station was gone, buried under layers of success and steel. In her place stood a woman who had clawed her way back from the abyss, a woman who had built an empire on the bedrock of her own pain. I felt a cold, calm certainty settle over me. There was no joy, no glee. Just a quiet, focused intensity. This wasn't just about business. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my name, my life, my story. Tomorrow I would return home. And I would show my father and his wife what a real curse looked like. The Vance Industries building was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown larger. It stood as a monument to a bygone era. A solid, respectable brick building that now seemed quaint and insignificant compared to the sleek, towering spire of the Phoenix headquarters. I walked through the lobby, my heels clicking with sharp, deliberate authority on the polished marble floors. Heads turned. Whispers followed me like a ripple in a pond. They recognized me from the magazines, the titan of tech and logistics. They just couldn't comprehend why I was here. I didn't go to the executive floor. Not yet. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. It was only 9:30. I had one stop to make first. I took the elevator down to the sublevel, to the archives. It was a place I knew well. As a teenager, I had spent countless hours here, my father teaching me the history of his company, showing me the original bill of sale for his first truck, the hand-drawn maps of his first delivery routes. The archivist, a mousy woman who had been there for 30 years, looked up in stunned silence as I entered. I gave her a cool nod. I'm here to see the original incorporation papers. And the file on the Sterling Corp contract. The one from 10 years ago. She stammered, but my tone brooked no argument. She retrieved the files, her hands trembling slightly as she handed them to me. I took them to a small table and sat down. The incorporation papers were signed by my father and my mother, Sarah Vance. Her elegant signature, a name Brenda had tried so hard to erase, was right there, a ghost from a happier time. Then I opened the sterling file. It was all there, just as my sources had told me. The contract had been solid. The deal was all but done. The reason it fell through was a single last-minute addendum from Sterling's legal team that Vance Industries had inexplicably missed. An addendum that was time-stamped at 8:05 a.m. on the very day my father accused me of cursing the deal. An addendum that had been emailed directly to Brenda's personal account, which she had been using for social planning for the company. She had seen it. She had buried it. She hadn't just manufactured a lie about a curse. She had actively sabotaged the company to create the proof she needed. I slid the document into my briefcase. It was time. The boardroom was on the top floor, a space designed to project power and success. But today it reeked of fear. The long mahogany table was surrounded by grim, aging faces. The board members, men who had gotten rich on my father's ambition and were now watching their fortunes evaporate. At the head of the table sat my father, Robert Vance. The 10 years had not been kind. His hair was completely gray. His powerful shoulders were slumped, and his face was etched with the deep lines of stress and failure. He looked tired. He looked defeated. Beside him, however, Brenda was a vision of defiant opulence. She was dripping in diamonds that glittered under the recessed lighting. Her face a carefully maintained mask of plastic perfection. She looked bored, as if this tedious discussion of bankruptcy was beneath her. She was waiting for her savior to arrive and replenish her accounts. I walked in at precisely 10 a.m. The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. I saw confusion, shock, and on Brenda's face, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a decade. Fear. My father's jaw went slack. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Eleanor," he whispered, the name a strange, foreign sound on his lips. "Hello, Robert," I said, my voice even and cold. I didn't call him Dad. That man had died for me 10 years ago. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, directly facing him, and placed my briefcase down. "I believe you're waiting for the representative from an investment firm." "That's me." A wave of confused murmurs washed through the room. "What is this?" my father demanded, finding his voice. "What kind of game are you playing?" "It's no game," I replied, opening my briefcase and pulling out a single sheaf of papers. "It's a buyout." As of 9:45 this morning, my firm acquired the final block of shares necessary for a controlling interest in Vance Industries. To put it in terms you'll understand, I own you. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. Brenda's face had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. My father looked as if I had struck him. You can't," he stammered. "I can." "And I have," I said. I slid the papers down the long table. They stopped directly in front of him. "My first act as the new majority shareholder is to call this meeting to order. My second is to dissolve the current board. All of you," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, "are fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Pandemonium erupted. Shouts of outrage, threats of lawsuits. I simply sat there impassive until the head of my security team, a formidable man named Carter, stepped into the room with 2 of his men. The protests died in their throats. One by one, the board members shuffled out, defeated. Soon it was just the 3 of us. "Family." "Why?" my father asked, his voice cracking. "After all this time, why do this? Why?" I let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "You dare to ask me why? 10 years ago you threw me out of your house with nothing. You disowned me. You called me a curse and left me for dead on the street. You want to know why I'm here? I'm here for everything. Everything you took from me. I did what I had to do to protect this family," he yelled, a flash of his old anger returning. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "You did what she told you to do." I turned my eyes on Brenda. She visibly flinched. "You let this viper whisper poison in your ear until you couldn't tell the truth from a lie. You destroyed your own daughter based on the word of a greedy, manipulative woman who wanted my mother's legacy for herself." "That's not true." Brenda screeched, her composure finally cracking. I loved your father. I tried to help. Did you? I asked, pulling the document from the sterling file out of my briefcase. I slid it across the table to her. Did you try to help when you received this email from Sterling Corp's legal team? Did you try to help when you saw the addendum that would have saved the deal? Or did you deliberately bury it to create another piece of evidence for your pathetic curse narrative? Her face went ashen as she looked at the paper. My father snatched it from her hand. I watched him read it, saw the dawning comprehension, the horror, the sickening realization of his own monumental folly wash over him. He looked at Brenda, then back at the paper, then at me. The truth had finally, after 10 long years, found him. Brenda, he whispered. His voice filled with a terrible, fragile disbelief. Did you? She couldn't answer. She just stared at him, her guilt written plainly on her face. I stood up. The real curse on this family wasn't me, Robert. It was your weakness. Your willingness to believe the easy lie instead of the hard truth. It was her greed, and your betrayal. I walked around the table until I was standing behind my father's chair. His chair. You're fired, Robert, I said softly. And you, I looked at Brenda, whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, are no longer Mrs. Vance. My legal team will be in touch regarding the divorce. The prenuptial agreement you signed is ironclad. You'll leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing. You can't do this, she shrieked. Oh, I can, I said. Carter. My head of security stepped forward. Ma'am, please escort this woman from my building. And make sure she takes nothing with her. Carter nodded and moved towards Brenda. She tried to fight, but it was useless. He took her arm in a firm grip and led her, sputtering and threatening, from the room. Now it was just me and my father. He sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was a fool. Please, can you ever forgive me? I looked down at the man who had been my entire world, the man who had shattered it without a second thought. I felt a pang of something, a ghost of the love I once had for him. But it was just that, a ghost. The wound he had inflicted was too deep, the scar too thick for forgiveness. No, I said, the word as cold and hard as the diamond of rage in my soul. I can't. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window behind his desk and looked out at the city. My city. I'm not tearing this company down, I said, my back to him. I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to make it stronger, more powerful than you ever dreamed. It was my mother's legacy before it was yours. I'm taking it back. I heard him get up and walk slowly, unsteadily, out of the room. I didn't turn to watch him go. I just stood there, alone, in the office that was now mine. I had won. I had taken everything. The revenge was complete. But as I stared out at the sprawling metropolis, I felt no sense of victory. No peace. Just a vast, cold emptiness. The fire that had driven me for a decade had consumed its fuel. And now, all that was left were the ashes. My phone buzzed. It was Carter. She's out of the building, Ms. Vance. We have another situation. A hostile takeover bid for Chan Industries is moving faster than we anticipated. They're trying to box us out. I stared at my reflection in the glass. The powerful woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes hard, her expression unreadable. The pain of the past was a part of her, but it no longer defined her. It was simply the foundation upon which she was built. The fight wasn't over. It was never over. This was just one battle. The war for the future, for power, for control, was endless. A small, cold smile touched my lips. The emptiness began to recede, replaced by the familiar, exhilarating rush of the fight. Let them try, I said, my voice low and steady. The game was just beginning. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left, and thank you for watching.